Chris Chinnock here for the 8K monitor. This is issue 54, and it includes a nice list of videos that we shot at the recent NAB show in Las Vegas. One of those videos that we write about as well is from Synamedia. Synamedia is an encoding company that work with BT and other partners to stream 8K live sporting content, a rugby match, to consumers in the UK. So we've got some details on their encoding and their thoughts about the 8K ecosystem going forward. Bob Rakes also put together a nice article on discover8k.com, which talks about 8K cables. Now, 8K cables and the connectors that go with that can be quite confusing. There are physical connectors, HDMI, DisplayPort, USB, Thunderbolt, and there are also protocols. And some of those protocols run natively on these connectors, and some run in emulation or alt modes. It can be very confusing to try and make them work together. And you have to also understand what support 8K has over each of these cables and each of these protocols. Again, it can be very confusing if you're talking about graphics or PC-based or gaming-based stuff, which has 444 color subsampling, or video, which is typically 420. And then if it's 8-bit or 10-bit, SDR or HDR. So understanding what cables support what and what interfaces support it. Bob tries to demystify that a little bit in this article. In our comment section of issue 54, we first talk about Apple's rumor, and I stress rumor, that they will have an 8K video camera in their next smartphone, the iPhone 14. We'll have to keep an eye on that, but potentially they would join other premium brands offering 8K video capture as well. We also have an article talks about EDID. So EDID is the handshaking interface that goes from a device to a display, and it helps the device understand the capabilities of the display so it can send the right signal. Sometimes that handshaking doesn't work, and you need an editing tool to try and figure out what's causing the problem. So there's a nice new one that's been recently updated to support 8K displays, so that could be handy for folks in the AV or video custom install market. We're also going to be going to SID Display Week next week, and one of the topics we want to look at is a potential OLED 8K display from LG Display, potentially aimed at a VR headset application. So we hope to learn more about that in a couple of weeks. And finally, there was an announcement from YM Cinema Magazine about the winners for a number of categories. But in the camera category, they specifically highlighted 3 8K cameras: the VENICE 2 from Sony, the 8K SDI from IO Industries, and the Canon EOS 5C version, the mirrorless camera from that company. So they are among other cameras that were highlighted, but clearly 8K is an important category at this stage. And we also highlight a story from the SDVOE, the Software Defined Video over Ethernet organization. They have a proprietary chipset that allows the transfer of video over IP networks. It's based on using a 10 gig Ethernet port, and that can support 4K 60 hertz 444 over that link. Now, what they're doing now is they've the ability to gang 4 of those ports together to support 8K video streaming over a 40 gigabits pipe. So that's aimed more on the professional AV market, and they should be showing that at ISC and perhaps at Infocom, along with a first announced partner for that. In our also Red section, we talk about the Red Raptor has now been Netflix approved. That's an 8K camera, and Netflix has its whole approval process for doing that, so that's not surprising. That's been approved now. I mentioned the SDVOE has a new partner for their 8K streaming. That's AV Link. They will be showing that at ISE and InfoComm. There's an article that talks about how 8K is transforming the ecosystem right now, an independent article, which is probably worth a good read. If you're interested in content from Mars, they've actually stitched together an 8K resolution video looking at a crater in Mars, which is actually pretty fascinating. There's a review of Samsung 8K TV. We talk about a new camera, a new camera from Z. Actually, it's a new phone from ZTE, the Exxon 40, which is also going to potentially have a video camera that can support 8K. And finally, in the AVR space, Yamaha has now introduced a new one, which natively supports HDMI 2.1 and can support 8K 60 pass-through. There were some issues with the bandwidth of that before. I understand it's now a full bandwidth HDMI pass-through, so that's good news from them. And that's the story for the issue 54 of the 8K Monitor.